Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast. I am your co-host, Tim Hannon, and joining me
Is Steve Wirt. That's me.
today, we're going to talk about the connection between Pittsburgh and Detroit in sports. So Pittsburgh and Detroit, they have a lot in common as cities. Both are Rust Belt cities. Both at one point were like powerhouse American manufacturing cities. Pittsburgh had the steel industry. Detroit had the automotive industry. Both cities kind of saw their respective industries collapse. Saw a lot of economic hardship because of that. Both had to reinvent themselves. Maybe Pittsburgh's done a better job of that than Detroit. Detroit probably still working on that, but nevertheless, right? Kind of similar towns. And not only are they similar for those reasons, but I think their sports histories are also very much intertwined. And that's what I wanted to kind of flesh out in this episode. So we've divided this episode into basically three sections. So we're going to talk about championships, people, and stories. So we'll start with championships. And here's a fun fact. All three Pittsburgh pro sports teams have won a championship in the city of Detroit. Conversely, only one of the three Pittsburgh pro sports teams have won a championship in the city of Pittsburgh.
So if we're having a championship in Detroit, we're pretty set there, huh?
Exactly.
What about the MAC championship that the bowl game a couple of years ago? I think that wasn't a MAC. It was just a bowl game against the MAC in Detroit. But I think Pitt won both of those, didn't they? Yeah.
We'll actually talk about that in one of our later stories. So don't worry, stay tuned. But the three championships, let's talk about those. The first one was the 1909 World Series between the Pirates and the Detroit Tigers. That was built as a rivalry between good guy Honus Wagner and bad guy Ty Cobb. But by all accounts, those two guys actually like each other. So much so that the press actually has to make up stories to make it seem more bitter than it really is. It's reported.
None of us could stand the guy while he was alive, so we told him to stick it.
Told him to stick it.
Yeah.
And you can't imagine a media that just fabricates stories. I mean, thank goodness that era is over. But in 1909, it's reported that during that World Series, Cobb is standing on first base. And while he's standing on first base, he says he's going to steal second base. And he points to Honus Wagner at shortstop and calls him a crowdhead, which apparently is some kind of German slur. Wagner was the son of German immigrants.
I thought he was Dutch. Huh.
Well, whatever. It's insulting, apparently.
What is this, 1909?
1909.
Yeah, that's an odd thing to say. The war hasn't even happened yet, but hey, whatever.
Well,
so he didn't like the
Kaiser.
Yeah, he didn't like the Kaiser even back then. He knew he was up to no good.
Yeah, Ty Cobb was ahead of his time in his ethnic hatred and racism. So, but what supposedly happens is, Cobb says this, tries to steal second, is thrown out trying to steal second, and it's Wagner that applies the tag to tag him out, and he tags him like really hard right in the face. He bloodies his lip, so he like gets him back. But anyway, that actually never happened. But it made for a good story. None of that happened. No,
not even a little bit.
No, there's literally they have every play recorded from that World Series, and there's no instance of him stealing second and getting thrown out like that. So that never happened. But what does happen is, that was my thing about the media making up stories. But what does happen is that Wagner.
Is there really old-timey movie of it? There's no
no, there's no old-timey footage of it either.
Yeah.
But what does happen is that Wagner outplays Cobb in the series. It does go the full 7 games. Game 7 is at Bennett Park in Detroit, and the Pirates crushed the Tigers 8-0. to give the Buccos their first ever World Series title. It's a big deal. It's redemption for Honus Wagner, Deacon Philippi, and Fred Clark, all the other guys that we talked about from that 1903 team. So that's the first Pittsburgh championship won on Detroit's soil. The second one comes just a little bit later. It's the 2005 Super Bowl. We of course did a whole 3-part episode on this. The Steelers were the number 6 seed in the playoffs that year. Jerome Bettis's final season, Bettis being from Detroit, goes to Detroit to play the Seattle Seahawks in Super Bowl 40, and triumphs and goes out a winner. So we're not going to rehash that whole story. I think we all know it. And again, we went into that in detail in a previous episode. So that was the second championship won on Detroit soil, of course, against the Seahawks, not against the Lions. The Steelers have never played the Lions with a championship on the line. The closest they came to that was the 1962 playoff bowl that we talked about in our episode where we did about Buddy Parker, Steve. That was the one that Vince Lombardi called the poop bowl, except he didn't call it poop. He used another 4-letter word, and he said it was a losers bowl for losers. So that was the only time the Steelers and Detroit Lions ever played each other outside of the regular season.
Was that for draft picks or no?
That was runner-up.
That was like the consolation game.
Yeah, it was a consolation game.
You get to say you're number 3 after. I'm the 3rd place team. Yeah. Yay.
It's the bronze medal game, essentially, right? Yeah. So hence Vince Lombardi's losers bowl for losers comment. And then of course the third championship was the 2009 Stanley Cup, another one we did a whole episode on, where the Detroit Red Wings played the Penguins for the second straight year. The Red Wings had actually won the Stanley Cup in Pittsburgh in 2008. So it's really 4 championships won between these two cities on the other cities' soil. And then, of course, famously, Marian Hossa switches sides. He goes to the Red Wings, but the Penguins win it in 2009. Again, we all know that story, and we did a whole in-depth episode about that we'll link from our website. That one was special for head coach Dan Bylsma because just like Bettis, he's from Detroit. And so he won that Stanley Cup Game 7 back in Detroit. So those are your 3 championships. A lot of Pittsburgh-Detroit championship history for sure, Steve.
Championship. I can't believe our soil's been sullied with Detroit championships. Wow. I don't know. I guess if we ever play another championship in Detroit, we'll be in good shape. Bet the house on the Pittsburgh team, huh?
Yeah. I mean, I don't see the Pirates making it to the World Series anytime soon, or the Steelers or Pittsburgh hosting a Super Bowl anytime soon. If they did, the Lions certainly wouldn't be anywhere close to it.
You don't know that. You don't know. Maybe Jared Goff will get it together. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, and then the Penguins and Red Wings now play in the same conference. So
yeah, that'll never happen. Yeah.
Right. So that was our championship section. Let's move on to people. And in this section, we're going to talk about sports personalities who were associated with both cities. And we already talked, of course, about Jerome Bettis being famously from Detroit, but another guy who was an important component to that 2005 Super Bowl team was defensive coordinator Dick LeBeau. He architected the defense that won that Super Bowl, and also coached the Steelers defense and several other Super Bowls. He spent his entire 14-year Hall of Fame playing career as a member of the Detroit Lions. So Dick LeBeau, a lot of history in Detroit and Pittsburgh. Another guy.
He's from Ohio, though, isn't he? I think he's from Ohio.
Good question. I'm not sure where he's from. I just know that his playing career was in Detroit. I remember when they went to at one point they got all the defensive players wore like Dick LeBeau old timey Lions jerseys when they were in practice to honor him. Another guy that was born in Pittsburgh is and was also on that 2005 Super Bowl team is Charlie Batch. He was drafted in the second round of the 1998 draft by the Lions. He started for the Lions for 4 seasons, but kind of unfortunate because he arrived right as Barry Sanders is retiring He signs with the Steelers in 2002 and spends 11 seasons. I didn't realize it was that long. 11 seasons with the Steelers as a backup quarterback. Definitely has some big wins when he's called upon for an injured starter, and really becomes a big fan favorite who's really, I think, still loved here today.
Yeah, I think I went to that was the game after was it Ben the year after Super Bowl 40, that first game. Didn't Batch end up starting? Yeah, because
Yeah, it was the Thursday night opener against, and they were playing the Dolphins.
And Nick Saban, I think.
Nick Saban, it was his first game as coach, and Batch threw a touchdown pass, like an 80-something yard touchdown pass to Heath Miller in the final minutes to win that game. So, yep. Yeah, he definitely had some, some good win. He was very, you just, Ben, the way he played, especially in that era, he was very prone to getting hurt. And it was always really reassuring to have Charlie Batch on the bench. Another crossover guy, Scotty Bowman. Scotty Bowman is in the front office for the Penguins when they win their first Stanley Cup in '91. And then that fall, head coach Bob Johnson tragically passes away, and Bowman takes over as head coach, and then he leads the Penguins to a second Stanley Cup in 1992. He then takes over as head coach of the Detroit Red Wings, winning 3 more Stanley Cups there in 97, 98, and 02. So Scotty Bowman, maybe I probably the only coach that won championships in both cities.
One of the
in any
greatest,
sport.
Yeah, one of the greatest hockey coaches of all time, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, won a couple with the Canadians too. So,
and
won championship in Montreal, Pittsburgh, and Detroit.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. And one of the guys that helped him win those championships in Pittsburgh was Hall of Fame defenseman Larry Murphy. He was on both those Stanley Cup teams in the early 90s. Definitely an all-time great for the Pens. And he later reteams with Bowman in Detroit and becomes an integral part of those championship Red Wing teams. So Larry Murphy won Stanley Cups for both the Penguins and the Red Wings.
Larry Murphy guy is underrated. Larry Murphy, well, I know he's in a Hall of Fame. It's hard to say he's underrated. I don't know.
No, that's fair. I mean, like you said, I mean, definitely in the Hall of Fame, but if you're even Penguin fans, right? If you're thinking of, just off the top of your head, reel off the all-time great players, obviously Lemieux, Crosby, Yager, Malkin,
Francis.
But then people would say Francis. People might even say non-Hall of Famers like Kevin Stevens before they would say.
You say
Larry
Joey
Murphy.
Mullen. People probably say Joey Mullen.
Yeah. Right. So that's a very good point. Murphy is underrated. I don't know that the Penguins win the 2 Stanley Cups without him. So, another guy that's associated with both cities, Hank Greenberg. Hank Greenberg was a baseball player, one of the greatest players in the history of the Detroit Tigers, 5-time All-Star, 2-time American League MVP, led the Tigers to 2 World Series championships. He's in the Hall of Fame. He even fought in World War II in the middle of his career just for good measure. In 1947, he gets into a very bitter contract dispute, and just like Barry Sanders and Calvin Johnson years later, he decides he would rather retire than play for a Detroit team any longer. But unlike Barry Sanders and Calvin Johnson, he changes his mind because the Pirates come along and convince him to come out of retirement to play for them. The Pirates actually make him the highest paid player in Major League history at the time, which Pirates and highest paid anything in the same sentence just seems weird to say. It's a huge deal. They actually reconfigure Forbes Field.
That's right, Greenberg Gardens. Yeah.
Greenberg Gardens. Yep.
Yeah.
To make the fence closer to home plate, because Greenberg tended to hit most of his home runs to left, and it was very kind of cavernous ballpark. So they shortened the fence just so they could have more Hank Greenberg home runs.
Thank God Bernie Dreyfuss wasn't around for that. He'd been mad.
Yeah.
Him and his no cheap home runs policy. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So yeah, a lot of excitement when Hank Greenberg comes to Pittsburgh. Bing Crosby, who owns a share of the Pirates, was also pretty excited about that. Here's some vintage audio of Bing Crosby and his buddy Groucho Marx on Greenberg's arrival in Pittsburgh.
Anyhow, I have in my pocket, a copy of a song I want you to sing.
Something clever?
Yeah, it could be. I didn't write it. Anyhow, Bing, this is a song about Greenberg. And if you don't mind, I'll teach it to you and vice versa.
Okay, let's break into song.
We've heard about those old-time dangerous pirates.
Of Captain Kidd and Silver John the Long.
But we prefer those modern dangerous pirates. As our victims walk the plank, we sing this song. Oh, goodbye, Mr. Ball, goodbye. You are going to see an awful lot of sky.
Don't hang around for Richard to open up that door.
When Hankus Pankus hits you where you've never been hit before. Oh, goodbye, Mr. Ball, goodbye.
So there you go. Groucho Marx and Bing Crosby.
What the heck show was that on?
No idea.
Definitely wasn't. What was the one he used to host? You Bet Your Life, or yeah. Wow, that's pretty cool. Groucho is definitely still one of my favorite comedians. I know I'm like way too young for that, but I don't know. My smart aleck remarks come from watching way too many Bugs Bunny and Groucho Marx. If you wonder why I am the way I am, I was raised on Bugs Bunny and Groucho Marx. So explains a lot, doesn't it?
It does. It really does. So yeah, Groucho and Bing pretty excited about that. It doesn't really pan out that well. Greenberg only plays one season in Pittsburgh. It's a good season. He cranks out 25 home runs and he leads the National League in walks, but the Pirates still finish in last place. So
was that in the 50s? Yeah.
47.
47. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good though. 25 home runs back then. That's real respectable.
Yeah. I mean, but it didn't really help the team on the field, but
Yeah.
generated some excitement. How about, here's a guy we just talked about in a recent episode, Kevin Colbert. He spends a decade as the head of scouting for the Lions before being named the Steelers general manager in 2000, where he spends the next 22 seasons leading the Steelers to all kinds of success. So Kevin Colbert, a guy that had an impact in both cities, probably obviously more so in Pittsburgh.
I didn't realize he was from Detroit or just coached in Detroit.
He was the head of scouting.
He's just a scout in Detroit.
Right. Well, he was the head of scouting, but yes, and it was for 10 years. I mean, he wasn't like he was there for 1 year.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's where they plucked him from, because he was like this up and coming guy that he was going to be a general manager in the NFL, and that's where he really built himself up. Was
I wonder who his picks were. Well, I guess he didn't get to make picks. Who was a scout in Detroit? Did he pick Herman Moore? Or, I don't know.
Well, I'm sure he had influence. I mean, being the head of scouting, you know,
Yeah.
And the Lions. I mean, it's hard to remember now, but in the 90s, the Lions had some good teams. They were a perennial playoff team, and
They just never could. Well, they had bad coaches, I think, and two, the league was so different. I've often thought about that. If Barry Sanders played, if I had Barry Sanders now as an owner or coach, I would hire Rich Rodriguez and have him run his offense. Barry Sanders and that crazy offense, you're going to have to make a tackle one-on-one with him 90% of the time. That's going to be a problem.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just the spread offenses, the sort of the get the guy in space kind of designs that you have today. You didn't have a lot of that back then. And Barry Sanders just always made his own space. Even still.
I mean, even if you could get him on a one-on-one matchup 50% of the time, I'll take my chances there.
Yeah, for sure. Jim Leland, one of the best managers in Pirates history, led the team to 3 consecutive division titles in the 90s, but sadly never wins a pennant. In Pittsburgh, he later manages the Detroit Tigers, where he does win 2 pennants, but they lose the World Series both times. Jim Leland still going strong, by the way, at the time of this recording at age 77. Definitely a tobacco company's dream, because
look, it's not bad for you.
Yeah, I mean, Leland smoked cigarettes in the dugout, in the post-game interview, while he was laying in bed at night, while he was drinking his coffee in the morning. I mean, So yeah, I mean, hey, that guy smoked a gazillion cigarettes, and yeah, he was fine.
Emphysema has not found him yet. Yeah,
No.
COPD. Yeah.
Nope.
Uh, but he is. Where is Leland from, though? He's not from either city, though, right? He grew up somewhere else, I think.
Right. This isn't.
Yeah.
This isn't. I mean, some
Yeah.
of these guys, like.
But
you
he
know.
definitely has a connection to both towns, just like Colbert, because he definitely has success in both places. Of course, having Miguel Cabrera helps.
Right.
I mean, he had Barry Bonds and Miguel Cabrera. I mean, you should win some games with those guys in your lineup, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's. I was really going for. He's from Ohio, by the way.
Okay.
But I was really going for.
Just like success in both cities.
Well, just some association with both cities' sports franchises, right? Not so much just was born there, although I did include Bettis, so kind of broke my own rule. How about Buddy Parker and Bobby Lane? Speaking of guys we did an episode on, Buddy Parker, coach of the Lions in the 50s. Bobby Lane was their quarterback. Those two guys won multiple championships in the 1950s. And then Parker famously quits and comes to Pittsburgh, as we detailed in an episode we did called The Steelers Go All In for a Championship. And then he acquires Lane in a trade, and kind of similar to the Hank Greenberg thing, a lot of high expectations, because here you got these guys that won in Detroit coming to Pittsburgh, but it doesn't really pan out. And again, we went into more detail about that in that episode. Joe Schmidt, Steve, you know who Joe Schmidt is? You're the Pitt fan.
Yeah, he's linebacker for Pitt. He's a Hall of Fame. I think he's in the Hall of Fame, the NFL Hall of Fame. I do.
He is, and guess who he played for in the NFL?
The Massillon Lions. The Pottsville Maroons. No, not so much.
Yeah. So yeah, Joe Schmidt, one of the guys who has his jersey number retired by Pitt football. I think there's only like 8 of those guys that have their number retired, and yeah, really, really brilliant Hall of Fame career playing for the Detroit Lions in the NFL. So that's another guy that made his mark in both cities. Swin Cash grew up in Pittsburgh, played her high school ball here. She goes on to lead the Detroit Shock to multiple WNBA championships in the 2000s, and she's a member of the Basketball Hall of Fame.
Detroit Shock. I was shocked. I've heard of her, but I didn't know she played for Detroit. That's my extent of WNBA knowledge. So
Yep.
Sorry.
And then for our last two, I will revert back to being from the town. So Clint Hurdle, he's a guy that's a native of Detroit, obviously managed the Pirates to their only brief success of the last 30 years. And then Brian Rust grew up in Detroit and won 2 Stanley Cups with the Penguins and just got a big money bag recently. So those are 2 guys that grew up in Detroit, but found some success in their sports careers in Pittsburgh. So that's the people section. Steve, any people that I forgot that crossed over that you can think of between Detroit and Pittsburgh?
Detroit and Pittsburgh? I don't know. I can't think of anybody off the top of my head. I mean, I don't know. Like, I did forget Greenberg played for Detroit. I didn't know Brian Rust was from Detroit. So
Yeah,
I didn't know he was an American player. I thought he was Canadian, but hey. I was wrong.
Yeah. Typically, hockey, you just sort of assume everyone's Canadian unless like they have a Russian name, and then
not so much.
That's about it, though. So Brian Rust from Detroit. All right, so championships people. Our third and final section is just generally sort of called stories. A lot of scandals, controversies, and just other stories. And the first one we'll go with was for sure a big controversy at the time, and people still remember years later. And it's this incident.
Using fourth quarter timing rules, each team receives 2 timeouts. The first team to score wins the game. We'll have a toss to determine who receives. Who will call it from Pittsburgh? Number 36, call it plays in the air. Heads is the call. He said heads. It is a tails.
Oh, I believe he said tails.
He did.
You want to take the ball?
Look at Jerome Bettis. What's going on?
You're changing the head. Which way you want to go? Oh, man.
Detroit has won the toss. Will receive.
There is a in there. Now that I listen to it all these years later, you can kind of hear a tails. But
So
I never believed that for years. But in that audio, if you listen closely, you can hear a.
yeah, I mean, if you really Zapruder film it, I guess you can make a case.
But it sounds more tails because I remember the time, like, oh my god. But be that as may, the Steelers had a chance to stop them on defense and win the game. So
Well, yeah. So let's give the background here. If folks aren't familiar, this is 1998. The Steelers are playing the Lions in Detroit.
Charlie Batch is the quarterback.
Charlie Batch is a quarterback for the Lions. I think Cordell Stewart's the quarterback for the Steelers. It's Thanksgiving Day, so it's a big deal. The Steelers were kind of like on the cusp of a playoff berth kind of team. They needed to win here. Game goes into overtime. So, of course, they flip a coin to see who gets the ball first. And Jerome Bettis sounds like he calls tails, but referee Phil Luckett hears heads. The Lions get the ball first, march down the field, kick the game-winning field goal. It's just a massive controversy because how can you screw up the coin toss? They actually make a rule change after this where you don't call it in the air anymore. So that's what they used to do. They used to say call it in the air. And the idea there was to prevent any kind of,
I guess, cheating. Yeah. So.
Well, any kind of perception that the referee somehow, I don't know how you could do this, but it's like held it in a way. Manipulate it. So if you call it in the air, then it's like no one can manipulate the flip. But boy, what a disaster that was. And two things about that. Number one, I mean, Steve makes a really good point there that no one ever remembers that the Steelers defense just laid down and let them march down the field, and even stopped them on a third down play. They were going to have to punt, but Chris Oldham, one of the defensive backs, got a face mask penalty on that play that got them into field goal range. I mean, it wasn't a good team that year. So, they still could have made a stand there and won the game, and they didn't. And then the second thing that I thought was interesting in rewatching that clip, if you listen to that audio again, right when the coin is flipped, you hear a voice call out, he said tails, like as the coin's in the air. And I always thought that was Carnell Lake, who was standing next to Bettis. It's actually the Lions player.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, the Lions players.
And that was obviously before it came up as tails, right? It was when the coin was still in the air. But he's thinking, no, he said tails, and if it lands on heads, then the Lions are going to get hosed, right? So I thought that was kind of, and then as soon as the coin lands, and you see the Lions player just kind of shut up and back away, like,
I think that was Robert Porcher, if I remember, which I could be wrong, but if I remember that, I'll be impressed.
I am impressed if that's the case, that you remember that. But I never realized that until I watched the clip for this episode. It's actually I just thought that was Carnell Lake, making the argument, but the Lions are actually, even the Lions think he called tails. So
there is they said he started to say head tails.
Yeah.
It's kind of a weak argument, but that's their line, and they're sticking with it.
Yeah. Poor Phil Luckett. He was kind of embarrassed out of the league shortly after that. Another controversy, Michael Moore. Michael Moore was a boxer from Pittsburgh, and his kind of one moment in time was in 1994. He defeats Evander Holyfield to win the heavyweight championship. So pretty big deal, Michael Moore winning the heavyweight championship. And the controversy here was, in boxing, they always do those like Michael Buffer type announcements when they introduce the fighters. These big kind of grandiose announcements. Well, at some point, when Michael Moore started to become really famous, he started being announced as being, quote, from Detroit instead of from Pittsburgh. And the reason why is because at one point in his career, when he started getting good, he he moved to Detroit to train there because Detroit's a very, long-standing tradition of a boxing city, and they just, the gym or the trainer or whatever they had there was, was better than what they had here. And man, that caused a stink amongst the locals. Like, if you really want to insult Pittsburgh people, kind of forget where you're from, right? Forget your roots. And that was what Michael Moore was accused of doing when he was being introduced as being from Detroit.
Wow, I didn't know that was a whole controversy, a whole thing. He's from Menneson.
Yeah, he
Get
was
it
from
straight.
Menneson. Yeah, that's
Get it
right.
straight. He's from Menneson down
Yeah.
Mon Valley, not no Detroit. Maybe we should, like, our next podcast, we should have like Michael Buffer style and announcements. And now weighing in
Yeah, that wouldn't
from
be-
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the Southern Dandy.
we'll have to shell out some money for Michael Buffer to do it. We'll just play it at the beginning of every podcast.
Maybe we
Make it
get
like
his
10 minutes
brother.
long.
Doesn't his brother do the UFC? We can get his brother. He can't afford Michael. We can get his brother.
Okay,
Yeah.
that works. Yeah, we
Yeah.
can get the discount Michael Buffer. Anyway, Michael Moore eventually loses that heavyweight championship to like 87-year-old George Foreman, and then he's never real. I mean, not that he's never heard from again, but that was kind of his. He kind of flamed out after that.
Well, once you get knocked out, it's easier to get knocked out the second time, and that's medical science, not me. But it's just easier because that's a concussion. That's what getting knocked out is.
Mm.
So it's easier to get concussions once you've had your first one. But
Good to know. I will try to avoid that.
yeah, don't get a concussion.
Another kind of scandal or controversy that connects these two cities in the sports world is the Detroit Lions curse. So we talked before about, the Lions traded Bobby Lane to the Steelers. And when they did that, supposedly he curses the franchise on his way out of town, and he says that they won't win anything for another 50 years. And this is in 1958. And of course, Bobby Lane's prediction comes true. The Lions actually don't win anything for the next 50 years. And just to really put the cherry on top of the cursed Sunday, on the exact 50th anniversary of that trade, that's the 2008 season where the Steelers win their 6th Super Bowl and the Lions become the first ever NFL team to go 0-16.
Wow.
So, I mean, you can believe in curses or not believe in curses. And there's some, dispute over if Lane even said that, but nevertheless, Lions were cursed, and I don't know. They haven't exactly fared well since then. So I don't know if it's a curse or if it's just bad management. Here's a fun fact. The Steelers and Lions have played each other 18 times since the Bobby Lane trade. And the Lions have only won 3 of those 18 games. That was in 1962, 1983, and the aforementioned 1998 Thanksgiving game. But
they won on a coin flip. I know they won last year. No, there was a tie.
they did manage. I was going to say
yeah.
they did manage to play the Steelers to a tie in both 1959 and 2021. So you got that at least, and lose every one of those games. Another connection that caused a little bit of a stir was around the Detroit Pistons, and you'd wonder, well, how does that connect to Pittsburgh? Well, 2 things happened around like this 2010, 2011 timeframe. One was the longtime owner of the Pistons passed away, and his widow wanted to sell the team. And then the second thing that happened was that Pittsburgh opened this new state-of-the-art arena called PPG Paints. I think it was called the Consol Energy Center at the time, now called PPG Paints Arena. And that led to just instant speculation that the team would relocate to Pittsburgh. And this wasn't just like internet rumors or people on Twitter making stuff up. The Pittsburgh mayor's office actually comes out with a statement that the city could for sure support a pro basketball team. And you had everybody from Forbes magazine to Penguins executives to Mark Cuban all weighing in on this. So, I mean, it wasn't, I don't, it was probably never a realistic possibility. There wasn't even an identified buyer from Pittsburgh. And eventually the Pistons are sold to billionaire Tom Gores, who keeps the team in Detroit. But for a while, there was a lot of speculation that the Pistons were going to move to Pittsburgh.
They still have been the Pistons, the Pittsburgh Pistons. I don't know. It's a nice bit of alliteration.
It is. I mean, I know that's,
would we get
an
all
homage
that
to the auto industry, but
could we like usurp all their championships? So like now we have 3 NBA championships right out the gate.
well, yeah, you would, because I mean, if the team relocates, you don't, unless it's like that special arrangement with Cleveland, but any other time you're carrying the championships with you. I
So
mean, when
Indianapolis has that Baltimore Colts championships from like the 50s and the Super Bowl.
the Ravens don't have that. It's a different franchise.
Yeah, wow.
When the Raiders moved to Las Vegas, Raiders won 3 Super Bowls in Oakland and Los Angeles. I mean, that's the franchise has Super Bowl.
Well, I mean, I remember that great Pittsburgh player, Ben Wallace and Chauncey Billups. Incredible.
Well, when I was a kid, the Pistons were my favorite team. That Bad Boys era team with like Isaiah Thomas, Joe Dumars, and Lambeer, all those guys. So I would have loved to see the Pistons move to Pittsburgh, but alas, it never happened. Going back to the world of boxing, we did talk about this in a previous episode. The Joe Louis Billy Conn fight, and I think we covered that in our Almost Miracle Plays episode, because what had happened was, so Joe Louis was an all-time great boxer. If you were going to make a list of the top 10 sports figures in any sport of the 20th century, you really have to put Joe Louis in there. He was just this larger than life, super famous figure. And in 1941, he's in the middle of an unprecedented streak of 26 consecutive title defenses. I can't even imagine fighting 26 guys in a row and winning, or even fighting 26 fights in a row. That's insanity.
Yeah.
And he's kind of running out of guys to fight, and he's scheduled to fight the Pittsburgh kid Billy Conn at the Polo Grounds in New York. It's a huge mismatch because Louis actually outweighs Conn by 30 pounds, and he's a 3-1 favorite. Again, this was literally just like they were running out of guys to fight. But Billy Conn shocks everybody. He actually dominates the fight. He's very quick. Louis can't keep up with that. And in the 13th round, Conn is ahead on, I believe it was 2 of the 3 scorecards. But he, against the advice of his trainer, he decides he's going to go for the knockout, and that's his doom, leads to his doom, because he tries to do that, and Joe Louis connects with a pretty hard punch, and that's the end of Billy Conn, and he gets knocked out. They do have a rematch years later, but because of World War II, that's delayed, and then by the time they do fight, Louis wins that pretty easily.
Billy Conn does have a street named after him. I think it's in Oakland. And I don't know. Maybe he should have played for the. I don't know. I give the guy credit though. You can't beat the champ unless you knock him out, I guess. I don't know.
We talked about that in our episode that we did, because we were kind of speculating, like, is he, when you win by decision like that, I mean, his strategy was, again, he was 30 pounds lighter than Joe Louis. Yeah. So his strategy was, I'm going to like run around and kind of jab and move, and win on the scorecards, which was a good strategy, but it was Joe Louis. It's like, okay, I guess you beat him, but did you really beat him? And if you could have got the knockout, I mean, remember when Mike Tyson lost to Buster Douglas? I mean, that was,
he got knocked down. Yeah.
He got knocked out, and that was to this day, that was shocking. I remember at the time people were talking about that for weeks. It back when the cover of Sports Illustrated was like a big deal, that literally made the cover 2 weeks in a row. The same event made the cover of Sports Illustrated 2 weeks in a row, because it just was so shocking. And had Buster Douglas won that on a decision, it would have been shocking, but not the way it was to see Mike Tyson actually go down. So I get it. I definitely get it. But boy, it's a shame that it just shook out that way. Another kind of connection between the two cities. So one of the more probably bizarre events in Pittsburgh sports history takes place on March 11th, 1984, when a sellout crowd fills up Three River Stadium to come boo and throw snowballs and beer bottles at Birmingham Stallions quarterback Cliff Stout. Stout had previously played for the Steelers, and like literally they sold out this game, this USFL game,
Yeah, just the boo
in
Cliff
the
Stout.
snow in March,
Yeah.
just so people could hate on Cliff Stout. And Steve, you and I talked about this before, and I remember we speculated at the time because we were too young to remember, like why did people hate Cliff Stout that
Yeah.
much?
Yeah.
Like
He's the
Man.
Mason Rudolph of that generation, I guess.
well, not even, but I mean, like,
I don't think anybody would like throw snowballs.
right.
At,
That's
like,
what I mean.
if Mason Rudolph was on it, people probably wouldn't like get that passionate about it. I don't think.
No, but
Yeah,
they did for Cliff Stout. And so what's the Detroit connection? The part of that hatred might date back to the Thanksgiving Day game at Detroit the year before, 1983. And the background for that game is the Steelers are 9-3 heading into that game. They're heavy favorites to beat the 6-6 Lions, but instead they get hammered by the score of 45-3 on Thanksgiving Day in Detroit. Cliff Stout has 4 interceptions. He posts a 6.3 passer rating. I think you would be hard pressed.
6.3.
6.3 and 4 interceptions. I don't know. You'd have to do some like Elias Sports Bureau kind of research, but you'd be hard pressed to find a worse game for any Steeler quarterback ever. And after the game, Stout doesn't really own his performance. Instead, he kind of laments how, in the eyes of the fans and the media, he'll never live up to Terry Bradshaw, who was the guy he was replacing. He says, "Oh, everything I do will just always be compared to Bradshaw." And even after that season, he admits that the pressure really got to him. He said, quote, "I tried to commit suicide, but the bullet got intercepted," which is a pretty dark joke. Kind of feels like a little bit of a cry for help, but
That's pretty morbid.
yeah, pretty morbid. So Steve, I just wonder if, so about, that was 1983, what, 15 years later, one thing you and I do remember is the game in Tampa Bay where Cordell Stewart got benched and then he was crying on the sidelines. And remember, his people just never liked Cordell after that. And I wonder if, Cliff Stout kind of taking that "woe is me, I'm not Terry Bradshaw, I guess I'm not Terry Bradshaw" approach just soured everybody on him, especially in that era when Pittsburgh was so much more, blue collar and lunch pal and do your job and shut up kind of attitude. I don't know. I just speculating, but I just really don't understand why Cliff Stout was hated so much. And I just wonder if that game at Detroit was kind of a breaking point for people, because you lost a game to a team that you shouldn't have. You got destroyed. He's just beyond terrible. And then he's just kind of similar to Cordell years later, just feeling bad for himself instead of taking some ownership and some responsibility and saying, "Hey, I got to be better."
I don't know. Sounds as good an explanation as any. I mean, definitely we ain't taking no whining around here. I could go in the mill and work for, not a lot of money and in a terrible working environment. So I don't know. It's good association. Like, people literally paid money to boo Cliff Stout. So go figure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. And if you look at his career, he was the backup quarterback, but they wouldn't give him, Chuck Noll wouldn't give him a lot of reps or really any reps in practice. He was sort of set up to fail a little bit by the coaching staff in his eyes. But still, it did not work out well. His son later committed to playing for Pitt when Dave Wanstead was the coach.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
But
And
then he ended up going somewhere else.
Yeah, because they got Sal Sinceri, or not Sal, Tino Sinceri. That was the big get that kind of pushed him out.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah, because
Okay.
it was supposed to be Cliff Stout's kid, and then it was like, oh, we got Tino Sinceri. He'll be way better. I don't know. I think the Stout kid went to Louisville, and I don't
Okay.
remember him even starting for them. So who knows how good or bad or whatever he was.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully it worked
He
out
didn't
better.
get snowballs thrown at him in Louisville, at least. So. Something.
That is true. And then our last kind of controversy was the Steve referenced this one earlier, the 2019 Quick Lane Bowl, Pitt versus Detroit area school, Eastern Michigan, and that game was actually played at Ford Field in Detroit. So there's really, I mean, you're going to be hard pressed to find any real history or rivalry between Pitt and any Detroit area school, and definitely no history between Pitt and Eastern Michigan. But nevertheless, things get really chippy in the days leading up to the game. According to Pitt, the Eastern Michigan players were antagonizing them and taunting them at these bowl week activities that they had. And then in the actual game, Kevin McGill, who's a defensive back for Eastern Michigan, he gets ejected for spitting on one of the Pitt players. If that's not bad enough, their quarterback, Mike Glass III, is ejected for throwing haymakers at Cam Bright and Paris Ford, two of the Pitt defenders, one of which inadvertently takes down the referee.
I remember that. Yeah.
So yeah, if there's any surefire way to get yourself ejected from a football game, punch the referee, even if it's by accident. Pitt does get the last laugh in that game. Game MVP, Kenny Pickett.
Pickett throws like a last minute touchdown. Yeah.
Yep. 25-yard touchdown pass in the final minute of the game to give Pitt a come from behind victory over the Eastern Michigan, whatever, the Thugs.
Eagles. I think they're from Ypsilanti, aren't they? I'm pretty sure they're from
I
Ypsilanti.
have no idea. Nor do I care. The only thing I'll ever remember about that school was their quarterback punching the referee.
Well,
So-
you know who was a quarterback for Eastern Michigan way back when?
Who's that?
Charlie Batch.
Oh, is that where he went?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's another Pittsburgh Detroit connection, I guess, kind of in a roundabout way. Maybe it's more
Yeah.
of a Pittsburgh Ypsilanti connection, but
Okay, so he played for that's wow, that's an interesting trajectory for his career. Growing up in Pittsburgh, playing college ball in Detroit, playing pro ball in Detroit, and then making his way back to Pittsburgh to play his final 11 seasons with the Steelers.
yeah, he didn't make it too far out of the Northeast.
Yes, very, very committed to those two cities.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's again, lots of both Pittsburgh and Detroit, definitely a lot of sports history in both those towns. And just thought it was interesting to explore some of the intersectionality between those two. Steve, any final thoughts?
Well, Pitt did play in the Pizza Bowl, the Little Caesars Pizza Bowl, and that was in Ford Field. And that did feature, who is it? James Conner, Tyler Boyd, and Aaron Donald. So
Oh,
there you go. It's
okay. I
I don't-
forgot
I
that
don't-
one.
And they played Bowling Green though, so that's not a Michigan school. So
Yeah, but it was in Detroit, so
yeah, there you go.
That's something. Yeah.
A little bit of a connection there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good call. Good call.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Well, thank you as always so much for listening. Please subscribe. Please check us out on social media or on our website. And if you could be so kind, please give us a rating on whatever podcast service you listen to. Hopefully a good rating. That always helps people find the show. Thank you, and we'll catch you next time.